You know how we often daydream about becoming a millionaire. We often fantasize about not having to pay rent anymore, not having to struggle to pay the bills, not having to work a 9-to-5 job. We can buy anything we want or go wherever we want. That's the life, isn't it? But being a millionaire is not always about getting everything you want. Though life is easier, some find trouble finding true love, someone who would love you even if you do not have the fame and fortune. This story is all about a millionaire's search for true love. Marcel Anthous is not your ordinary millionaire. One look at him and you would think he's a peasant. You see, Marcel lived like a hermit. If he goes out, he wears disheveled clothing, has unkempt hair, and has a toothless smile. He was not that good-looking either. People who had no idea who he was would not pay that much attention to him. While other millionaires would boast and show off their wealth, Marcel was very humble. Fame and glory were never one of his dreams. He did not need that. He was a very simple man who had very simple needs. All he wanted was love. Marcel was happy and content having just the bare necessities. Even if he could very much afford a mansion, he lived in a humble wooden cabin in the French Alps. The cabin had no modern amenities, there was no electricity or piped water. Living this way helped Marcel save a lot of money. His humble ways made him climb up the financial ladder. As we all know, the French Alps are a tourist haven. The area is filled with resorts and ski systems. Marcel happened to own large tracts of land in the area, particularly near the village of Puy-Saint-Pierre. As tourists flocked to the area every year, the land rates increased, which also increased Marcel's net worth. Marcel wisely built houses on his land and rented them out. As Marcel's wealth continued to increase over the years, he never changed one bit and continued to live his humble life in his wooden cabin with his frugal spending habits and reclusive lifestyle. His looks never changed, and he still maintained his relationships with family and friends. In fact, despite his frugal ways, Marcel was very generous when it came to his family and friends. In the private land around his cabin, he decided to build a few simple chalets and had his relatives and friends live in them for free. It is no wonder that he is well loved by those who knew him. Given the ideal location of the land he owned, there were a lot of investors who were interested in buying his property. They planned to build another resort on his land, but Marcel refused to sell. He chose to maintain his rental business. As the years went by, the value of his land continued to increase. It did not take long for Marcel to be one of the wealthiest people in the area. Despite his incredible wealth, friends and family started to worry about him. He was getting old, and his love life had been stagnant ever since Marcel was young. His constant disheveled state put off any potential lovers, and now that he is way past his prime years, they were worried that Marcel would not find love at all. Until one day, Sandrine de Villard, a businesswoman from Paris, showed up, wanting to buy a part of Marcel's property. As usual, Marcel refused to sell out. Sandrine was intrigued by Marcel and invited him to dinner. She intended to talk business, but it seemed that the night ended differently for the two. Cupid was in the area that night, and it did not take long for Marcel to open up his heart to Sandrine. When Marcel introduced Sandrine to his family and friends, they were surprised, although they were happy to see that Marcel was visibly happy with the presence of Sandrine. Some could not help but raise some eyebrows. Sandrine seemed to live a lavish lifestyle. They were complete opposites, and they doubted that the relationship would last long. But unlike the other women who tried to date Marcel in the past, Sandrine stuck around longer than they expected. She was not turned off by Marcel's questionable hygiene or hermit ways. She did not even attempt to change him. Sandrine embraced him for the way he was, and for Marcel, that was more than enough. But despite all this, those who lived in Marcel's private village were still doubting their intentions of Sandrine toward Marcel. After all, they barely knew her, and they were very protective when it came to Marcel. A lot of them saw Sandrine as a gold digger, and some had even tried to talk to Marcel about their relationship. It was clear that these people thought Sandrine was an invader in their little haven, and that Marcel was in trouble. Their friends and family of Marcel were very familiar with stories of gold diggers who scam old and wealthy men and women just to get a hold of their fortune once they pass away. They wanted Marcel to marry someone who truly loved him. Seeing the age gap of more than 20 years, and the huge difference in their lifestyles, they doubt that Sandrine was the one. It did not help that Sandrine always had the habit of wearing flashy clothes. She was so different from all the other women in the village. There was also the fact that she kept on urging Marcel to take her out as if she was eager to be seen in public with him and make their being a couple known in the area. Despite all the opposition, Marcel decided to stick by Sandrine and fight for their love. Sandrine was also trying her best to win the villagers over. She was making it clear that she does plan to spend the rest of her life with Marcel. Although they initially did not accept the union, Marcel's family and friends considered the fact that there was a possibility Sandrine was indeed sincere in her intentions for Marcel. Sandrine could be the one Marcel had been waiting for a long time. Seeing how Marcel was finally happy, all they could do was hope that they were wrong about her. Besides, they knew Marcel was smart. He would be bound to see Sandrine's true colors as the relationship went on. One day, Marcel thought about how much his life had changed since Sandrine came along. He was suddenly sure about one thing. This was the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. And to the shock of everyone who knew the hermit millionaire, Marcel decided to propose to Sandrine. Of course, Sandrine said yes to his wedding proposal. Everything that had been happening was so off character for Marcel that alarms started ringing for his inner circle. But what could they do? Marcel was lost in love, and now that they were engaged, they could no longer speak up about the way she was asking for expensive gifts or the way she was handling his cash. What if Sandrine pushed to be married right away? They hardly knew this woman who suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and they wished Marcel did not have to make such a hasty decision. And just as they suspected, the wedding day came as sudden as the engagement. Marcel, who initially was mad at everyone for not making Sandrine feel welcome, sent out wedding invitations to their wedding by mail. The wedding ceremony was to take place in the village chapel, and everyone had been invited. Those who were close to him were shaken by how fast things were turning out when they saw the invitations, and it was the only thing people in town talked about for days. When the big day came, all the villagers made their way to the village chapel, dressed in their best attire to support Marcel. Although everyone showed up, there was no denying the tension in the air as they waited for the ceremony to start. Some of them were secretly hoping that Marcel would not push through with the wedding. There was no doubt that not everyone was happy as the ceremony took place, and not everyone was polite enough to keep their feelings to themselves as well. Some people in the audience were jeering and booing the newlyweds as they exited the village chapel after their wedding ceremony. Sandrine was bothered, but decided to keep her chin up and give a smile as she continued walking. She did not expect her wedding ceremony to end this way. Marcel has seen how visibly shattered Sandrine was. He assured Sandrine that he loved her and that she was the love of his life. All the nasty comments and insults should not matter. They were married now, and nobody could do a thing about it now. Despite these reassurances, Sandrine could not help but feel heartbroken. A bride should be treated like a princess on her wedding day, but people were treating her like she was the village monster. It was clear that people saw her as an enemy. Since their union, Marcel's inner circle did not try to hide their displeasure towards Sandrine. It has been months since Sandrine and Marcel first met, but people continued to refer to her as a gold digger. Sandrine shrank from all the disgusted and mean looks she gets every time she steps out of the house. It became very difficult for her to live in the village with everyone hating her. Sandrine tried her best to live with the dreadful situation. When she and Marcel went out, she became showier to prove to everyone how much she loved and adored Marcel. She even posted cute pictures and selfies together proudly, and even if Marcel was always smiling and looking happy, none of the villagers seemed to acknowledge it. Their suspicions against her were too deep-rooted now. Sandrine and Marcel made an unconventional decision in their marriage, choosing to live apart. Sandrine went back to Paris to tend to her real estate business, while Marcel remained in their village. This choice sparked resentment among the villagers, who believed it was a sign of their lovelessness. Rumors and speculations about their arrangement swirled around, with locals assuming Sandrine couldn't tolerate Marcel's simple life. Tragedy struck when, during a visit to Marcel, a road trip with Sandrine's friends ended in a fatal accident, resulting in Marcel's untimely death. The villagers mourned the loss of their humble millionaire. A priest used the occasion to remind the locals of Marcel's true character and urged them to change their ways. Sandrine was devastated by her husband's death, but her grief was met with indifference from the villagers who had never fully trusted her. Accusations of foul play surfaced, supported by Marcel's family and friends, and an investigation was initiated. Sandrine further aggravated the situation by claiming sole inheritance of Marcel's fortune, expressing her intent to evict residents from Marcel's lands for development. This decision incited a fierce conflict between her and Marcel's loved ones, as it went against Marcel's previous gifts of land and homes. Amidst the investigation, rumors of Sandrine's alleged involvement in Marcel's death gained traction. Although there was no concrete evidence of foul play, suspicions grew due to the unusual circumstances of the accident and the fact that everyone else survived while Sandrine and her friends were in the car. Because no evidence could point towards Sandrine, Marcel's family decided to seek legal help. The lawyers advised that if Marcel had any doubts at all about his wife, he would have left something to indicate so. After all, Marcel was a wise man. But the truth was, none of them had talked with Marcel since the wedding. Marcel was mad at most of them because they could not accept Sandrine. But despite this, the family went into Marcel's wood cabin and searched through his belongings. Sandrine had not been there at all since Marcel passed away. Then, one of them came across a handwritten note scribbled on the back of an envelope. The relative looked it over and was about to set it aside when he noticed that the paper was notarized. As everyone gathered around, they were shocked to see that this note was Marcel's will. What shocked them more was the fact that Sandrine had been lying the whole time. The writing was Marcel's, and it was just like him and his frugal way to write his will on the back of a used envelope. This was the holy grail that could save them from Sandrine's evil plans. Marcel had some realizations and changed his will. The will indicated that all this money was going to his cousin. The renters who were living on his land will get the full legal rights to those properties. The family and friends could keep the cottages he built for them and the land the cottages were on, and the rest of his possessions were to be divided among his family. They could not believe what they just read. This was the ultimate gift Marcel left for his loved ones. There was not a dry eye in that cabin when they found the note. They knew they were indebted to Marcel for the rest of their life. As it turns out, Sandrine was not even mentioned in the will. Despite their hatred towards her, Marcel overlooking Sandrine surprised everyone. They knew how generous Marcel was and they were sure he would not leave Sandrine empty-handed, but this note says otherwise. There were a lot of questions. What did Marcel realize that made him change his will and leave out Sandrine? How did he figure out Sandrine's true nature? When the will was revealed, Sandrine did not take it well. She hired her team of lawyers to verify they would try to overturn it. She claimed that Marcel was so smitten with her that it would be impossible that she would not get a share as his legal wife. She even questioned the way the will had been casually scribbled in the back of an envelope. There was no way the document could be legal.